Picture this: a former Olympic snowboarder turned international drug kingpin with a $15 million bounty on his head, sitting in a luxury hideout somewhere in Mexico. The FBI chief compared him to El Chapo himself, calling Ryan Wedding one of the most dangerous fugitives they had ever hunted. But here is what nobody saw coming. Instead of going down in a blaze of gunfire like most cartel leaders, Wedding did something that shocked law enforcement worldwide. He walked into the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City and surrendered. But what happened in those final 24 hours before he made that decision? What was going through his mind as he prepared to face life in prison? And why did this man, who had evaded international law enforcement for years, suddenly decide to give up his freedom? Today we are going to break down Ryan Wedding's entire criminal empire, examine his rise to the FBI Most Wanted list, and reveal the shocking events that led to his surrender. We will explore his final Instagram posts, the role his girlfriend played in his decision, and the calculated moves he made before walking into that embassy. Stay until the end because the real story behind his surrender will completely change how you see this case. Ryan James Wedding was not your typical drug lord. He was a man who once represented Canada at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, competing in snowboard cross. But somewhere between the slopes of Olympic glory and the streets of international drug trafficking, Wedding transformed into what federal prosecutors would later call one of the most significant drug trafficking threats to North America. To understand the magnitude of Wedding's final 24 hours, you need to grasp the empire he was about to abandon. According to federal indictments, Wedding did not just run a drug operation. He orchestrated a multinational criminal network that would make seasoned cartel leaders take notice. Wedding's organization was not dealing in small quantities when it came to moving multi-kilogram shipments of cocaine. They moved hundreds of kilograms at a time. Federal prosecutors alleged his network transported over 1,800 kilograms of cocaine, nearly 4,000 pounds of pure product. To put it in perspective, that quantity has a street value exceeding $200 million. This was a massive operation. The operation worked like a well-oiled machine. Cocaine originated from South American suppliers, moved through Mexico, and then was distributed across Canada and the United States. Wedding's network had the infrastructure to handle massive shipments, with sophisticated logistics that rivaled legitimate international businesses. What made Wedding particularly dangerous was how he operated across Canada, the United States, and Mexico. His network spanned 3 countries seamlessly. In Mexico, he maintained connections with established cartels and used the country as both a transit point and an eventual hiding place. In the United States, major distribution networks moved product to cities across the country. Canada served as his home base where he maintained legitimate business fronts and family connections. This 3-country operation required incredible coordination, trusted personnel in multiple countries, and the ability to navigate different legal systems and law enforcement agencies. Moving drugs is only half the battle. You need to clean the money. Wedding's organization employed complex money laundering schemes that federal investigators spent years unraveling. The operation used front companies, legitimate businesses that served as covers for drug money. They employed couriers, trusted individuals who physically transported cash across borders. The network relied on intermediaries and third parties who helped obscure the money trail. And it used international banking with complex financial transactions across multiple countries. The money laundering operation was so sophisticated that it took federal investigators years to trace the financial networks. They discovered that Wedding's organization had laundered tens of millions of dollars through various schemes, all tied to drug proceeds from their massive cocaine distribution network. But Wedding's empire wasn't just about moving drugs and money. Federal prosecutors alleged that his organization was responsible for multiple murders, including the killing of 2 family members in Ontario, Canada. This wasn't just business, it was personal, and it was violent. The indictment painted a picture of an organization willing to use extreme violence to protect its interests. When people crossed Wedding's network, the consequences were often fatal. This level of violence is what ultimately put him on the FBI radar as a priority target. By 2024, Ryan Wedding had become more than just another drug dealer on law enforcement's radar. The FBI elevated him to their 10 most wanted fugitives list, a designation reserved for the most dangerous criminals in the world. This wasn't just about drug trafficking anymore. This was about a man who had become a threat to international security. The FBI 10 Most Wanted list is exclusive territory. Since its creation in 1950, only 529 people have made this list. Being added means you have crossed a line from regular criminal to someone law enforcement considers a clear and present danger to public safety. When the FBI announced Wedding's addition to the Most Wanted list, they did something that immediately caught international attention. They placed a $15 million reward on his head. This was not just any reward. This was one of the largest bounties ever offered by U.S. law enforcement for a drug trafficking case. To understand the significance of this amount, consider that most FBI rewards range from $100,000 to $1 million. A $15 million reward puts Wedding in the same category as international terrorists and the most dangerous criminals in the world. The FBI was sending a clear message. They wanted Ryan Wedding, and they were willing to pay unprecedented sums to get him. Perhaps the most telling moment came when FBI officials began comparing Wedding to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the notorious Mexican cartel leader. This was not hyperbole. This was law enforcement's way of communicating just how dangerous they considered Wedding to be. El Chapo became the point of reference. Like El Chapo, Wedding had built an international drug trafficking empire, evaded law enforcement for years, used violence to maintain control, operated across multiple countries, and corrupted officials and systems. The comparison mattered because El Chapo had been considered one of the most powerful drug lords in history before his capture and conviction. With Wedding on the FBI's Most Wanted list, the pressure was not just coming from U.S. law enforcement. International agencies began coordinating efforts. Canadian authorities intensified their search because of Wedding's citizenship and family connections. Mexican law enforcement faced pressure to locate and apprehend him. Interpol issued international notices, and financial intelligence units across multiple countries began tracking potential money flows. This level of international coordination meant that Wedding's world was shrinking rapidly. Every day he remained free, the net closed tighter around him. By late 2024, Ryan Wedding found himself in a position that every fugitive eventually faces. The walls were closing in, and his options were disappearing fast. Let's examine the 3 critical factors that were weighing on his mind during those final weeks before his surrender. Wedding was not facing a few years in prison, or even a decade behind bars when considering the life-level federal charges against him. The federal charges carried potential life sentences. The indictment included conspiracy to distribute cocaine, money laundering charges, continuing criminal enterprise known as the Kingpin Statute, and murder conspiracy charges. Under federal sentencing guidelines, these charges could result in multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. At 43 years old, Wedding was looking at spending the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. That massive reward was not just a number. $15 million on the table made every person he met a potential threat. Former allies, family members, even romantic partners could be tempted by that kind of money. With that reward, Wedding could not trust anyone. The reward turned his own network into his biggest threat. People who had once protected him now had a financial incentive to betray him. This kind of psychological pressure breaks even the strongest criminals. Wedding was not just hiding from local police or even federal agents. He was under intense international pressure as the target of a coordinated international manhunt involving FBI agents and task forces, Canadian law enforcement, Mexican authorities, Interpol, financial intelligence agencies, and international informant networks. Criminal psychology experts have identified three inevitable realities that every high-profile fugitive eventually confronts, and Wedding was experiencing all three at once. When you are on the FBI's most wanted list with $15 million as a reward, the movement becomes extremely risky. Wedding could not use his real identity for travel, stay in one location for extended periods, trust new people or locations, access his legitimate financial resources, or communicate freely with family or associates. Every day brought new risks. Every person he encountered could be the one to turn him in. This level of paranoia and isolation takes a severe psychological toll. The people and systems that had protected Wedding for years began to crumble under pressure as his protection network started collapsing. Associates were being arrested and potentially cooperating. Financial resources were being frozen or seized. Safe houses were being compromised. Corrupt officials were distancing themselves, and family members were under surveillance. As these networks collapsed, Wedding's world became smaller and far more dangerous. Perhaps the most crushing realization for any fugitive is understanding that arrest becomes inevitable. Wedding had to confront the mathematical reality that with unlimited resources, international cooperation, and a $15 million incentive, law enforcement would eventually find him. The question was not whether he would be caught. It was whether he would be taken alive or dead, and whether he would have any control over the circumstances of his capture. In what might be one of the most bizarre moves in fugitive history, Ryan Wedding decided to create an Instagram account during his final weeks as a fugitive. This was not just any social media presence. This was a calculated attempt to control his narrative before law enforcement could define it for him. Wedding's Instagram posts painted a picture of a man living without fear or regret. He posted images of expensive watches and jewelry, luxury cars and motorcycles, high-end restaurants and locations, and designer clothing and accessories. But these were not just vanity posts. Criminal behavior experts suggest that Wedding was attempting to project an image of success and control. By showing luxury items, he was communicating several messages. He was not hiding in fear. He still had access to significant resources. He was living life on his own terms. He was not broken by the pressure. The Instagram account served multiple purposes beyond just showing off wealth. Wedding was playing a sophisticated psychological game with law enforcement and the public. First, he was exercising narrative control. By posting his own content, he could shape how people saw him before his inevitable capture. Second, the posts might have been intended as misdirection, to throw off investigators about his location or resources. Third, demonstrating that he still had resources and connections could serve as a negotiation tool useful in eventual plea negotiations. Finally, like many criminals before him, Wedding wanted legacy management. He wanted to control how he would be remembered. Perhaps the most humanizing element of Wedding's final days was the role his girlfriend played in his decision to surrender. Sources close to the investigation say she became the voice of reason in his increasingly chaotic world. Living as a fugitive is not just hard on the person running, it is devastating for their loved ones. Wedding's girlfriend lived in constant fear of violent arrest or assassination, isolation from family and friends, an inability to live a normal life, and severe psychological stress from the uncertainty. She began pressuring Wedding to consider surrender as a way to end the nightmare for both of them. While Wedding may have been caught up in the adrenaline and defiance of being on the run, his girlfriend offered a crucial outside perspective. She could see what he might have been blind to. The situation was unsustainable. The risks were escalating daily. A peaceful surrender was better than a violent capture, and they had no real future while he remained a fugitive. Sources say his girlfriend played a decisive role in his final choice. She helped him understand that surrender was not defeat. It was taking control of an impossible situation. Her influence may well have been the deciding factor that led him to choose the embassy over continuing to run. During his final weeks as a fugitive, Ryan Wedding was constantly on the move throughout Mexico. This was not just paranoia. It was a survival strategy based on the reality of his situation. If the FBI or Mexican authorities had located Wedding through traditional law enforcement methods, the arrest would likely have been violent and dangerous. Consider what typically happens when authorities locate a most wanted fugitive. Heavily armed tactical teams conduct the arrest. The fugitive might resist or attempt to flee. Innocent bystanders could be endangered, and the fugitive has no control over the circumstances. Wedding understood that if law enforcement found him before he was ready, the situation could turn deadly very quickly. To avoid detection, Wedding employed a strategy of constantly changing locations. He never stayed in one place for more than a few days, used different safe houses across Mexico, avoided patterns that investigators could track, and maintained multiple escape routes from each location. This constant movement was exhausting and stressful, but it was necessary for survival. Even while living as a fugitive, Wedding was preparing for his eventual legal battle. This preparation was crucial to his surrender strategy. Wedding made contact with high-profile criminal defense attorneys who specialized in international drug trafficking cases. This was not just about getting representation. It was about understanding his legal options, preparing for potential plea negotiations, ensuring his rights would be protected, and developing a defense strategy. Wedding and his legal team began preparing the documentation and narrative that would accompany his surrender. This included statements about his voluntary surrender, claims of innocence, requests for fair treatment, and preparation for media coverage. Before surrendering, Wedding had to secure his personal belongings and any evidence that might be helpful to his defense. This included financial documents, communication records, personal items of value, and anything that might support his eventual defense. In the hours before his surrender, Ryan Wedding made one final Instagram post that would shock law enforcement and the public alike. This was not just a social media update. It was a carefully crafted public relations move designed to frame his surrender on his own terms. Wedding's final Instagram post contained several key elements. He emphasized that he was turning himself in voluntarily, not being captured. He maintained his innocence of all charges and called for a fair legal process. He expressed confidence that the truth would eventually come out, and he framed the surrender as his decision on his terms. The timing of this post was crucial. By announcing his intentions on social media before approaching authorities, Wedding accomplished several things. He created a public record of his voluntary surrender and generated media attention that could influence public perception. He established his narrative before law enforcement could control the story, and he demonstrated that he was surrendering from a position of choice, not desperation. Wedding's choice to surrender at the United States Embassy in Mexico City was strategically brilliant. This was not a random decision. It was a calculated move that offered several advantages. The United States Embassy provided Wedding with several benefits. Embassies are considered sovereign United States territory, providing a controlled and neutral environment. Embassy surrenders generate significant media coverage, and the surrender would follow diplomatic protocols rather than law enforcement raids. The embassy offered safety with reduced risk of violence compared to a street arrest, and Wedding could walk in on his own terms rather than being dragged out of a hideout, giving him control over the situation. By choosing the embassy, Wedding was sending a clear message. He was not running anymore and was ready to face the United States legal system. He was surrendering as a matter of choice, not capture, and he wanted the process to be civilized and diplomatic. The actual surrender process unfolded exactly as Wedding had planned. Mexican authorities took custody of him at the embassy, and he was peacefully transferred to United States custody without incident. Unlike most high-profile fugitive captures, there were no SWAT team raids, no shootouts or violence, no high-speed chases, and no dramatic arrest footage. Instead, Wedding walked into the embassy, identified himself, and was processed through official diplomatic channels. This peaceful surrender stood in stark contrast to how most international drug fugitives are captured. El Chapo was captured in violent raids multiple times. Other cartel leaders often die in shootouts with authorities, and most fugitives are taken by surprise in dramatic operations. Wedding's surrender was almost anticlimactic in its civility. From the moment of his surrender, Wedding has maintained a consistent position regarding the charges against him. He has been clear and unwavering. He maintains complete innocence, stating, "I did not do what they are accusing me of." He has not pleaded guilty to any charges and has made no admissions of wrongdoing. He emphasizes his right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. This consistent message of innocence serves several legal purposes. It preserves all legal options for his defense and avoids statements that could be used against him. It maintains the possibility of plea negotiations and keeps public opinion open to his version of events. Wedding's innocence claims are not just legal strategy, they are also public relations. By maintaining innocence, he keeps his story in the media, maintains support from family and friends, preserves the possibility of public sympathy, and challenges the government to prove their case. Wedding's voluntary surrender sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. FBI agents and international investigators had been preparing for a violent confrontation or a years-long manhunt. Instead, they received a phone call from the U.S. Embassy saying their most wanted fugitive had just walked in. In the history of the FBI Most Wanted list, voluntary surrenders are extremely rare. Most fugitives on this list are captured in violent raids, killed while resisting arrest, found dead by suicide, or caught after years of investigation. Wedding's peaceful surrender was so unusual that it required law enforcement to completely change their approach to his case. Wedding's surrender also had immediate impacts on the ongoing investigation. Other suspects in his network faced increased pressure. Investigators had to shift from manhunt mode to prosecution preparation. International cooperation efforts were redirected, and the $15 million reward was no longer needed. With Wedding now in custody, the focus shifts to what promises to be one of the most significant drug trafficking prosecutions in recent years. Wedding faces a massive federal indictment that includes conspiracy to distribute cocaine with a possible life sentence, money laundering with up to 20 years per count, continuing criminal enterprise with a mandatory life sentence, and murder conspiracy with a possible life sentence. If convicted on all counts, Wedding could face multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Life is the core exposure he now faces. Wedding's legal team faces an enormous challenge. They must challenge the evidence against him, question the credibility of cooperating witnesses, argue that he was not the leader prosecutors claim he was, and potentially negotiate a plea deal that avoids life sentences. Federal prosecutors have spent years building their case against Wedding. They likely have wiretapped communications, financial records showing money laundering, cooperating witnesses from his organization, physical evidence from drug seizures, and international intelligence cooperation. Wedding's case has implications that extend far beyond his individual prosecution. It highlights the global nature of modern international drug trafficking. Operations span multiple countries. Criminals use sophisticated financial networks. International cooperation is essential for prosecution, and technology plays a crucial role in both crime and investigation. Wedding's background as an Olympic athlete adds a unique dimension to his case. It challenges assumptions about who becomes involved in drug trafficking, highlights how legitimate achievements can be overshadowed by criminal activity, and raises questions about the pressures and opportunities that elite athletes face. Assumptions are part of the story. Wedding's use of Instagram during his time as a fugitive represents a new phenomenon in criminal behavior. We are seeing fugitives use social media to control their narrative. The intersection of traditional crime and modern technology, and the role of public relations in criminal cases. Social control changed the dynamics. Ryan Wedding's last 24 hours as a fugitive represent one of the most calculated and strategic surrenders in criminal history. From his Instagram posts to his choice of the U.S. Embassy, every decision was designed to give him maximum control over an impossible situation. Calculated choices defined those hours. Looking back at Wedding's final moves, several elements stand out as strategically brilliant. He used social media to control his narrative, and he chose a peaceful surrender rather than violent capture. He maintained claims of innocence throughout, leveraged his girlfriend's influence to make key decisions, and selected the embassy as a neutral and safe surrender location. Peaceful surrender was central. Beyond the strategy and calculation, Wedding's story is ultimately human. It is about a man who built an empire, faced impossible odds, and ultimately chose to surrender rather than die as a fugitive. His girlfriend's influence reminds us that even the most hardened criminals are still human beings with relationships and emotions. Human elements remain. Wedding's surrender raises as many questions as it answers. Will he eventually cooperate with authorities? What evidence do prosecutors really have against him? How will his claims of innocence hold up in court? What impact will his surrender have on his criminal network? Questions linger. Wedding's case sends several important messages. To other fugitives, sometimes surrender is the smartest option. To law enforcement, even the most wanted criminals can surprise you. To the public, the reality of criminal life is far more complex than movies suggest. Messages are clear and complicated. As Ryan Wedding sits in federal custody awaiting trial, his story is far from over. The legal battle ahead will determine whether his strategic surrender was brilliant or futile. Regardless of the outcome, his last 24 hours as a fugitive will be remembered as one of the most calculated and unprecedented surrenders in criminal history, remembered for its uniqueness. The man who was once compared to El Chapo chose a different path than the notorious cartel leader. Instead of going down fighting, Wedding walked into an embassy and faced his fate in a courtroom. Whether that decision was wise or foolish will ultimately be determined by a jury of his peers. Chose a different path. One thing is certain: Ryan Wedding's transformation from Olympic snowboarder to international fugitive to voluntary surrender will be studied by law enforcement, criminal defense attorneys, and criminologists for years to come. His story represents a unique chapter in the ongoing war against international drug trafficking, and a reminder that even in the darkest criminal enterprises, human choice and redemption remain possible. Studied for its lessons.